You know that feeling when something you thought you understood just suddenly clicks into a whole new gear? That's kind of what we're aiming for today on the deep dive.
Hmm.
We're diving into intimacy, specifically sexual intimacy, but maybe not in the way you'd expect.
Yeah, we tend to think, intimacy equals sex equals orgasm. But the source material we're digging into today, it's this really interesting exploration, calls itself exotic sex positions, but honestly, it goes much deeper.
Right.
It really gets into the nuts and bolts of the orgasm reflex itself and some, well, very specific ways to consciously work with it.
Exactly. So less about like Cirque du Soleil in the bedroom
Haha, yeah, definitely not that.
and more about understanding these techniques, this really intentional way of engaging with our own bodies, our partner's responses,
Hmm.
and just seeing what the source suggests this can actually do for connection.
Okay.
Okay, so let's get into it, starting right at the beginning. Understanding that orgasm reflex.
Yeah, the source really hammers this home. The first step, the absolute crucial thing, is getting to know your own body's response.
How so?
It suggests observing your orgasm reflex, maybe through self-stimulation, at least, say, 10 times. And it's not just about reaching the end point.
Right.
It's about becoming really familiar with the whole process leading up to it.
Tuning into that,
Mm-hmm.
that split second, right? That moment,
Yeah.
just before it tips over, before it's, inevitable.
Precisely. The source calls it the onset of orgasm. You're aware it's coming, but you could maybe still pull back. It's that tiny window.
What are we looking for there? Like, physically?
Could be anything, really. A specific buildup of pressure, maybe, or a particular kind of tingling. Whatever your personal signal is that the cascade is about to start.
Okay.
And the source points out, typically orgasm involves between, say, 8 and 25 muscular contractions, but that varies.
Yeah, makes sense.
Though, interestingly, the author mentions their own experience is consistently 18 to 20 contractions, and that's over like 30 years.
Oh, that's specific.
Yeah, that kind of detail really grounds it, I think. Makes it feel less abstract.
Okay, so you've done your homework, you know your signals. What's next? This wave edge technique. Sounds cool.
It does, yeah. The core idea is learning to ride right up to that point where orgasm feels like it's just about to happen, and then intentionally easing back. So you're not trying to, like, shut it down completely. You might even allow 1 or maybe 2 contractions to happen, then consciously relax.
That sounds tricky. Relaxing right then.
It is. It takes practice.
Yeah.
The source suggests things like slow, really conscious breathing, staying focused on the sensations, not trying to block them out,
Right.
and deliberately letting your abdominal muscles go limp.
Ah.
And the key thing it stresses is what it isn't. It's not distraction. You're not meant to be thinking about, I don't know, your tax return.
Uh-huh. Right. Stay present.
Exactly. Stay present with the physical feelings, but consciously release the tension that normally pushes you over the edge.
The source uses that analogy, right? Riding a wave of pleasure that just keeps cresting but doesn't actually break.
That's the one, staying right on that edge. And you can practice this on your own, to get a feel for it.
Makes sense.
But the author does say it can actually be easier with a partner, especially when you're first learning.
Oh, so?
Well, your partner can offer really gentle physical guidance. Maybe just a tiny shift in pressure or position. Something to help you avoid those involuntary pelvic thrusts that often signal you're about to lose control.
Like having a spotter at the gym, but
Yeah.
different.
Sort of, yeah. A guide helping you navigate those really intense sensations without getting swept away.
Which leads us nicely to this idea of taking turns, the lookout role.
Yes. So while one person is the wave rider, focusing on staying at that edge, the other becomes the lookout.
And their job is?
Basically, to help the wave rider stay just below that point of full orgasm, helping manage the intensity, maybe gently intervening if they sense their partner is about to be pulled over the edge.
It sounds like a very connected, very active way to be intimate, even when one person isn't the one right on the edge.
Absolutely. It's a shared focus.
And the source mentions these sessions can go on for a while, like an hour or more, with
Well-
breaks even.
Yeah, it's a very different pace, isn't it? Not the typical build and release pattern. It allows for a rest, reconnection, and then resuming.
That's really different.
And apparently, as partners get more used to it, more attuned, those distinct roles of wave rider and lookout can kind of blur.
Okay.
It becomes more of a fluid, shared experience, both deeply tuned into the flow of sensation together. The source actually links the shared presence to non-religious tantric ideas.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned the lookout helping manage things. The source also talks about an element of power in that role. That sounds potentially complicated.
It is, and the source handles it carefully. The lookout might realize they have this ability, with just a subtle touch, to guide their partner closer to or further from orgasm. And the text emphasizes just how profound that is, someone trusting you with their sexuality on that level. It describes witnessing your partner's pleasure unfold like that as potentially deeply moving for the lookout.
But there's a big warning label attached, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely crucial. A very clear warning. Do not force your partner into orgasm, even if you feel you can.
Why is that so bad, according to the source?
It breeds mistrust, obviously. But also, kind of counterintuitively, it can actually hinder the wave rider's ability to develop that really fine-tuned awareness of their own body, that proprioceptive sense that this whole technique relies on.
Ah, so it undermines the very skill they're trying to build, like grabbing the handlebars when someone's learning to cycle.
Exactly. You take away their chance to find their own balance.
And this connects to the idea of offering or refusing the gift of release, especially linked to a woman's cycle sometimes.
Yeah, it touches on that, suggesting desires might fluctuate and the need for orgasm might feel stronger at certain times.
So communication is key.
Absolutely paramount. The source really stresses equal sharing, mutual respect, constantly checking in, and not just assuming you know what your partner wants or needs. It's about that responsiveness.
Okay, so this isn't a quick trick. The source suggests, what, at least 20 minutes of exchanging these waves?
Minimum, yeah. 20 minutes of this off and on wave riding shared between partners.
And potentially longer for something more.
It suggests closer to 40 minutes might be needed to potentially tap into what it calls a sought-after spiritual experience. But it's clear that under that can still be very pleasant.
And that time is shared, not necessarily 50-50 turns.
Exactly. It's the overall duration of the shared state. And apparently, with practice, the switches between roles can become much quicker, more seamless.
But don't get cocky.
Haha, precisely. The author slips in a reminder not to get overconfident and forget the core principle. Relax when it's your turn to ride the wave.
Okay, but let's be real. Sometimes the wave is going to break, right?
Yeah.
What happens then? Someone gets pulled into orgasm despite the technique.
Yep, and the source is really reassuring about this. No panic, no anger, no distress.
Good to know.
If you've both been close to the edge for a while and you sense your partner tipping over, the source says you can just choose to join them. Go with it. Or if you prefer, just stay calm, observe, hold the space. No big deal.
I liked the bit about gentle apologies and forgiveness.
Yeah.
It reinforces that it's exploration, not performance.
Totally. That line, the supply of pleasure is not meted out stingily. It's about abundance, generosity.
Yeah, I like that.
And as people get more adept, the source mentions some other interesting outcomes, like achieving satisfaction, feeling sexually satiated after maybe 20 or 30 minutes without a full conventional orgasm.
Really? Just done?
Apparently so for some.
Right.
Or experiencing orgasmic sensations but without the usual muscle contraction.
Wow, okay. The feeling without the reflex. That's fascinating.
Isn't it? And then there's the flip side, the unpredictability. Both partners might have decided against orgasm, been riding the waves, and then suddenly both want a conventional climax. The source calls that possibility tumultuous.
Huh. I can imagine. Paints a picture.
It just shows the fluidity of it all, doesn't it? Staying open to the moment, which kind of leads into how the source connects this to Tantra and Karezza.
Right. It brings those up for context.
Yeah, but it's careful to clarify. It's mostly talking about non-religious forms like Karezza, not necessarily the traditions with, specific rituals like the 5 sacred foods, Kundalini energy, chakras.
Okay.
It says the value of those really depends on accepting the whole belief system behind them.
So it's distinguishing the techniques from the cosmology?
Exactly. But it does draw on non-religious tantric ideas like Karezza, and it notes that Karezza, as the source understands it, doesn't necessarily have that old idea about male ejaculation being wasted energy. The choice to have orgasms or not is presented as much more flexible based on what feels right individually or as a couple. Karezza, in this context, is seen as primarily focusing on non-orgasmic connection.
Which brings us right back to that core question the source asks itself. Is this sacred sex? Or just, great sex?
Yeah. And the answer seems to be, the technique alone isn't magic.
Right.
You can master the physical control, but that doesn't automatically equal a spiritual experience. The source warns against focusing only on method without what it calls heartfelt reverence for life and sexual union.
So intention matters a lot.
Hugely. But the author does state their personal belief. If you do approach it with that reverent heart, you will tap into spiritual feelings.
And it mentions the historical link.
Yeah, points out that feelings like these have historically been the bedrock for various sexually oriented religions and even magic cults. But ultimately, it says the metaphysical meaning you find or don't find is up to you.
So how do you find that divinity if you don't have a religious framework? Does it offer suggestions?
It does. It mentions the caressa practice of deep eye gazing with your partner. Also, contemplating the sheer universality of sexual connection, how it runs through all life. And then consciously expanding your awareness outward from your shared intimacy, encompassing the world, the cosmos even.
Wow, that's a big jump.
It is. It uses this phrase, the magnetic ocean, this feeling of tapping into a universal, ongoing sexual energy that is life itself.
Magnetic ocean.
Yeah, and it even digs up an old 19th century term for carezza, magnetation.
Magnetation.
Yeah, coined by John William Lloyd. It really highlights that sense of energetic connection beyond just skin on skin.
It definitely suggests there's a potential depth here far beyond just the physical techniques.
Exactly. The potential seems to depend entirely on the intention and the mindset you bring.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. Key insights from the source. We've got understanding your own orgasm reflex as step one.
Definitely. That self-awareness piece.
The wave edge technique itself, that conscious dance with the threshold.
Riding the wave, not letting it crash.
The dynamic of wave rider and lookout. That shared focus and guidance.
The partnership aspect.
And the potential for these really expended deep encounters.
Yeah, changing the whole rhythm.
We also touched on that delicate power element and the absolute need for responsibility and trust.
Crucial. No forcing.
The time investment needed, navigating slip-ups with grace.
Accepting it's a practice, not perfection.
And this intriguing idea of satisfaction or orgasmic feeling without the standard climax.
Yeah, broadening the definition of satisfaction.
And finally, connecting it to ideas from caressa, while separating technique from guaranteed spiritual outcomes unless approached with reverence.
Right. The technique is a tool. The experience depends on how you use it. The main thing, I think, for anyone listening is seeing how consciously engaging with your body's natural responses can genuinely open up new avenues for intimacy.
It really does seem like these techniques, as the source lays them out, offer a fundamentally different way to think about sexual connection. Moving beyond just the peak, the orgasm, and exploring the whole landscape leading up to it, and maybe finding deeper connection, more awareness, maybe even those spiritual feelings the author talks about.
Which leaves a really interesting question for you listening right now. How do you currently think about intimacy, about sexual connection? Could exploring some of these ideas, even just mentally or maybe with a partner, shift that understanding? Could it unlock something new for you? Definitely food for thought.